Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inshallah, we'll finish chapter 2 with the last of the topics, and this is called cycles in nature. Of course, it's not meant to mean bicycles in nature or anything like that, but what it really means is that in nature, many of the main ingredients of living things are recycled. Organic things, living things, are made up of basic components of even at the atoms level, from like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and things. And these are recycled. All the people who have lived before, all the animals that have lived before and died, their bodies have decomposed, and all that organic matter has been recycled in nature. So, in the same way, there are other cycles that are not of organic things, and there are, for example, there's the water cycle. Water is recycled in nature. So these are the cycles that we're going to talk about, and specifically we're going to talk about 3 cycles: the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle, inshallah. So here's a cartoon representation of the water cycle. So water in the oceans and lakes and rivers, it evaporates, and then condenses to form clouds. And then there, in the appropriate conditions, the water descends, so to speak, upon the land again in the form of precipitation of various different kinds: rain, snow, sleet, hail, etc. And then the precipitation, either through rivers or groundwater, that is the water that is absorbed in the ground and eventually makes its way into the main water basins. So, and then it evaporates again. So here's a water cycle where the water kind of goes, is recycled over and over again. So as the water goes over here, see, it's evaporated, right? And as it comes to precipitation, it's used by plants, and grass and animals, and whatever remains, it returns, right? And whatever remains, it returns. So that's how it is recycled. Here's the same picture, but a little bit more detailed. Here is showing that the water evaporates from the oceans and from lakes. Okay, this is called evaporation. And when water evaporates from ground, that's given a slightly different term, transpiration, but same concept. And after the vapor evaporates, it's transported to different locations and descends again on ground in the form of precipitation, and then it flows through surface runoff into rivers and lakes, etc., or through percolation and into the groundwater back to other big bodies of water like that. So this is another representation of the water cycle. The second cycle that we're going to talk about is the carbon cycle. Carbon cycle is basically recycling of the carbon atom. Carbon is known as the atom of life. The living things are made of carbon molecules. So carbon is known as the atom of life, and it is the major component of carbohydrates, sugars, proteins, and fats, right? So it's a very important molecule. So carbon dioxide in the air, see, carbon doesn't flow in the air by itself, right? It's attached to oxygen molecules in the form of carbon dioxide. That's how we inhale. That's how we exhale the carbon dioxide from it. So carbon is found in the form of carbon dioxide in the air. Okay, so the carbon dioxide that's in the air is taken up by plants. It's absorbed by plants, right? They kind of like breathe in the carbon dioxide, right? And plants convert this carbon dioxide in the air to organic molecules with the process that you already probably know, photosynthesis. So plants take in the carbon dioxide and they do photosynthesis and they turn it into organic molecules, sugars, etc. Okay? And these organic molecules, here's plants and here's carbon that was made into organic molecules eaten by, like moo or cow over here. So, and then the carbon dioxide that was in the air, now it's in the cow, for example, right? Where did all the carbon that was in the cow come from? Where it comes from? The carbon dioxide that was originally in the air, which was converted into organic molecules by photosynthesis. Now, after the cow dies or other living things die, the carbon dioxide is recycled. okay, by decomposers, bacteria, fungi, and all those things that we saw before. They recycle it and convert it, and then that carbon dioxide is again recycled. Some of carbon dioxide, for example, this woodcutter goes and chops wood so it can burn the wood, see, that releases carbon dioxide, and that goes into the air as well. Combustion, which is the using organic fuels for burning organic fuels, the same process occurs with gasoline in cars. It releases back the carbon dioxide. So this is called the carbon cycle. See, it's also doing a big cycle, going into plants and going back and back into the air. What's left over. Speaking of air, you gotta know what's air, right? What's most of the air? Most of the air is actually nitrogen. See, nitrogen. If you were to just grab a bunch of air, right? Most of it would be nitrogen. Okay. The second most molecule is oxygen. Okay. 21% of the air approximately is oxygen, and carbon dioxide and water vapor and other gases form a very small percentage of gases. Despite the fact that they are very small percentages, global warming is thought to be occurring because of an excess of carbon dioxide within this minuscule quantity of gases that are in the air. So the predominant components of air are nitrogen, oxygen, and then carbon dioxide, water vapor comprise the rest. Okay? That's what air is. Here's another representation of carbon cycle. See, in this cycle is kind of going backwards in a way. So it goes into the plants. Plants take it up, okay, with the assistance of sunlight. So they do photosynthesis, and then when the plant dies, it decays and goes. And then some other animals, like they eat the plants, right? When they die, they also decay, and then organic matter is recycled. Fossil fuels like oil, right? They're actually decayed organic matter. When people drill holes in the ground to dig for oil, they're drilling for decayed organic matter. Usually like big, huge forests millions of years ago. They're being like putrefied and becoming oil. So oil is actually just decayed organic matter millions of years ago. And here's a factory that's burning and returning carbon dioxide to the air. When animals convert food into usable energy, they produce carbon dioxide. So when we exhale in carbon dioxide. So when we eat food, we get carbon dioxide that was turned into sugars and etc. proteins by other living things. And when we metabolize it, when you use it up, we make carbon dioxide and we exhale it back into the environment. This is a carbon cycle. So we talked about the water cycle, we talked about the carbon cycle, we talked about nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen, if you recall, is the most abundant molecule in the air, and plants need them. In fact, if you go to friendly neighborhoods, plant store, if you want to get fertilizer have a lot of they have nitrogen materials, stuff like that, because they need it for growth. But the thing about nitrogen is the nitrogen as it is available in the air cannot be used by plants as it is. It has to be like fixed. Okay? In other words, it has to be changed. When it's very fixed, it has to be changed into a form that the plant can absorb. Okay? So nitrogen in decaying matter and waste and bacteria, fix the nitrogen in a way that the plant can absorb it. So the nitrogen in the air, okay, is taken up by the bacteria in the ground, right? And change into forms the plant can absorb. Okay, so and then when plants die, etc., those plants and other animals, when they die, they degrade the animals and plants. They're decomposed, and and the nitrogen is brought back into the soil that way. Okay, so nitrogen is also similarly recycled. Okay, so again, nitrogen as it exists in the air, although it's the most abundant molecule in the air, cannot be used as it is. Unlike carbon dioxide, plants just take it in. Say, come on in, carbon dioxide. But nitrogen, no, they can't. First, it has to be fixed with bacteria to usable forms so that they can be taken up. Okay. Besides these cycles, see, there are other cycles, the phosphorus cycles, calcium cycle, etc., that we didn't talk about. And that actually concludes our chapter. So before I finish, I just want to review some of the topics that we talked about. We started out with talking about what is natural history. Is a study of plants and animals and how they interact with each other. Then we talked about ecology, is the study of interaction between living things and their environment. And natural history, for example, can be compared to like anatomy, versus physiology is how everything works together in the human body. We talked about biosphere, is that portion of Earth that supports life. Okay, includes the atmosphere and the oceans and the Earth's crust. And we talked about biotic and abiotic factor. These are all living and non-living things, respectively, in the environment of an organism that are important for survival. Then we talked about ecology and how ecologists study their science. They study organisms at an individual level, and they study interactions between members of the same species, and they study interactions between species, right, etc. And we talked about the differences between populations and biological communities, and how communities, along with the abiotic factor, give you ecosystems, and different ecosystems give you certain biomes, and biomes altogether combined will give you the biosphere. So that was that. And then we talked about how organisms acquire their energy, how they get energy. And to understand that, we must understand these two words. A habitat is where the organism lives out its life, and a niche is a specific role in that environment. And we talked about that organisms in general are they don't mess with each other. They don't necessarily always compete with each other. Organisms in the same environment, but there are relationships with permanent relationships between species, and this is called symbiosis. And we studied 3 types of symbiosis: mutualism, where both species benefit from one another. And we talked about the ants and the acacia tree. Commensalism, where one benefits, the other one's not harmed, and parasitism, where one benefits and the other is harmed. And then we talked about how our organisms get their energy. We talked about producers or autotrophs, those living things that are able to make their own energy by a process called photosynthesis. Everybody else are consumers or heterotrophs, including ourselves, which include the herbivores, the carnivores, and the scavengers, etc. We talked about food chain. We talked about the food web and how energy flows in an ecosystem, and in the hierarchy, in the trophic levels, and how only about 10% of the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. And we concluded this chapter with cycles that occur in nature. We talked about 3 of them, including the water cycle, carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. And that concludes this chapter. And until next time, then, Assalamu alaikum.